we've seen that new entrants into the market are a threat to the firm's profits. What strategies might be available to do something about that? One central idea that we've seen is that if economic profits exist in the industry, that acts as an incentive for firms to enter the market and to provide new sources of supply. That, in turn, threatens the demand for the firm's product and threatens its profits. That new competition could come from two sources. It could come from firms that are within the country itself, or it could come from foreign firms in the form of imports. So, can the firm either discourage the entry of new firms, whether they're domestic or foreign, or can it do something to lessen the impact if those firms do enter the market? As we'll see, possibly not too much can be done, at least legally, except delay or maybe limit the damage of this new competition. And in particular, I think firms that are small relative to the size of the market are not going to have very much power in discouraging new firms from entering the market. That was really one of the stories that we saw when we thought about monopolistic competition. That was a situation in which there were many relatively small firms. There was not any single dominant firm in the market. So in such a situation, the best that an individual business could do would probably be just to limit the damage that new entrants might cause. So let's consider a few ideas. One familiar theme is the idea of product differentiation. That is, just making your product significantly different in some way from the products of competitors. So I suppose the key words here are things like investing in a brand name, developing the trust of buyers, providing good customer service, getting a good reputation for quality and reliability, and so on. The stronger are these characteristics, the more difficult it is for competitors to get your customers away and to get the customers to switch to a competitor's product. If we put that in more technical terms, we could say that the demand for the firm's product is going to be more price inelastic. That is, the firm is going to have more ability to raise price without losing as many customers. We've also seen a related concept, that of the cross-price elasticity of demand. So that would be a situation in which if new competitors entered the market, let's say, and reduced their prices, attempting to lure some of the firm's customers away, the stronger is the firm's brand name and customer service and so on, the smaller is that cross-price elasticity going to be. In other words, the less responsive is demand for the firm's product going to be to the actions of competitors in the market. So if the firm were to pursue such a strategy and invest in its brand name and trust and customer service and so on, that would be a strategy that would tend to at least insulate it to some extent from competition. So in that situation, the potential profits for new entrants into the market would be smaller. And if they were going to overcome this barrier, it would be costly for them. They'd have to spend more to do that. One thing that is being assumed, by the way, here is that firms have pretty good information about demand and costs in the market. In reality, it's likely that the firms that are already in the market are going to have better information. They'll have better information about product demand. They'll have better information about costs of production than would potential entrants. So there are informational ideas as well, which would suggest that if potential entrants don't have very good information, they're going to face greater risks and uncertainty about entering the market. That, however, while it is true, is not something that firms can do very much about in terms of strategic behavior. Another idea that's mentioned in the text is control over access to key inputs. So here the idea is that some inputs may be necessary in order to produce the product. You may need some particular technology, some skilled labor, something like that. If potential entrants can't get access to those key inputs, then that may be something that could prevent them from entering the market at all. I tried to think of some examples, and one example that occurred to me was the production of silk in ancient China. For a long time, China has produced silk for many thousands of years, and for a long time, the knowledge about how to produce silk was kept secret. It was actually, I believe, the penalty was death for attempting to export silkworms or silkworm eggs from China. And this attempt to keep this information secret was really quite successful, and China was able to prevent other countries from learning how to produce silk for a long time. Another historical example that came to mind is the production of glass in the Republic of Venice. So there's an island near Venice called Murano, and production of glass was moved to that island in the year 1291 in an attempt to keep the production techniques secret. So that was also quite successful in basically preventing skilled labor from moving away and taking their knowledge with them. A more recent example, which has attracted some attention from economists recently, is the existence of what are called non-compete clauses in a lot of people's labor contracts. This has particularly been discussed in the United States. The idea is to put a clause or a part into a contract that says that if you lose your job with your employer or you quit your job, you can't go and work for a competitor, at least for a certain length of time. So if a lot of workers have such clauses in their contracts, then it would be more difficult for new entrants to the market to be able to hire workers away from existing firms. What else might be done to discourage competition? Well, one idea would be import restrictions, because one source of competition is imports from foreign countries. So it's possible for a firm in a country to take action to reduce foreign competition, and it can do that by appealing to its government to impose import restrictions. And that can be done legally in certain circumstances. So here's a little bit of background. International trade law is centered on a document called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, usually called the GATT. And this is administered by the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. And the GATT lays out certain conditions under which taxes, called tariffs, can be imposed on imports. And those conditions are the following. If an imported good is subsidized in some fashion, and those imports are causing injury to domestic firms, then a country's government can impose tariffs on those imports. Now, a subsidy can take many forms. Essentially, it's really just the foreign firm not paying the full cost of production. It doesn't necessarily have to be that a foreign government is actually giving its firms money, a subsidy in other words, but it could be something more indirect than that. For example, there's currently a dispute going on between the United States and Canada about Canadian exports of softwood lumber. And the American claim is that Canadian lumber producers don't pay the full cost for the wood that they cut on land that's owned by the government. And so they're claiming that that in effect is a subsidy. Another reason for imposing tariffs is the idea of what is called dumping. So the idea is that a good is being sold in the domestic market at a loss. In other words, it's being sold below cost, or an alternative definition is that it's being sold at a price that's less than what it's being sold for in some other market. So, for example, if a good was being sold in some other market for, say, $200 a unit, but it was being exported to the domestic market, that is the market where our firm is located, for $100 a unit, then that could be considered as dumping. And lastly, if foreign goods are coming into the domestic market very rapidly in a way that's causing serious injury to domestic producers, those producers can go to the government and say, we're being injured by imports and we want protection. And under the GATT, the government would be able to take action against those imports. Well, next I'm going to consider strategies against entrants to the market that are not legal, and we'll see why they're not permitted.